Hi, I'm Eddie Micah Jr., and you are welcome to the program. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Ukrainian forces are strengthening their positions in Russia's Kursk region, where Kyiv has launched a surprise offensive. Ukraine says it has destroyed a bridge that formed part of a Russian military supply chain. The Kremlin says Ukraine used US-made rockets to attack the structure.
A Ukrainian Air Force commander released this video of a strike on a bridge in Kursk. Russia says Ukraine used US-made HIMARS artillery to destroy the bridge that crossed the River Seine. Blowing the bridge up could disrupt Russia's supply lines to its forces in the area.
We see that the occupier is suffering losses, and this is helpful, very helpful for our defense. It is about destroying the logistics of the Russian army and draining their reserves. We must inflict maximum damage on all Russian positions, and we are doing that.
Zelenskyy said the Russian town of Sucha, 10 kilometers from the border, is now fully under his troops' control. Russian statues and symbols are defaced as Ukraine prepares to set up a military command office here. They now claim control of over 80 Russian villages. A Belgorod region governor has ordered the evacuation of even more.
From August 19, we are closing access to 5 settlements, removing residents and providing them new housing.
Russian residents in Kursk are now seeing scenes familiar to Ukrainians after their city was shelled.
I wish they would protect our city of Kursk from all this. They've got it under control. But as you can see, not everything is under control.
There was fear. People started to pack their bags with their documents and belongings, thinking about where to go if the worst happened. It was very scary, especially when we had a building bombed nearby. Very scary.
But Ukraine itself is still under attack. Children are being forcibly evacuated from the Donetsk region. Residents are fleeing the city of Pokrovsk. And an airstrike on the city of Sumy shows Ukraine must still put out fires on its own territory, even as it starts them across the border.
I asked DW Correspondent Sonia Phalnikar in Kyiv what Ukraine and its allies have said about the strike on the bridge in Kursk.
We haven't heard a lot about this destroyed bridge from the Ukrainian military so far. We know that this bridge was strategically significant, that it was used by Russia to supply its troops near the town of Gloshkovo, about 25 kilometers north of the border with Ukraine. And Russia now claiming, as you said there, that Ukraine likely used US-supplied HIMARS artillery to blow up that bridge. They're also claiming that this strike killed some volunteers who were trying to evacuate some civilians. We have no independent confirmation of that. Now, Ukraine hasn't responded to these allegations, but we know that in the past, the US has given Ukraine permission to use the HIMARS rocket launcher on targets about 100 kilometers within the inside of Russia, which means that this targeted bridge would be in that range. But the destruction of this bridge is certainly in line with what Ukrainian officials have been saying so far, namely that one of the goals of this incursion into Kursk is to, stop Russia from using that region as a launch pad for cross-border strikes, and that means, targeting its supply routes and logistics hubs.
Right. Russia has now been forced to divert several thousand troops from occupied Ukraine to this counteroffensive in Kursk. How significant is that?
Well, we heard earlier this week from a Ukrainian military official who was quoted in the media here saying that Russia is redeploying some of its units from the front lines in the south, in Kherson and Zaporizhia. And now we're hearing from from US officials, that they are now being used to kind of fend off that escalating incursion into Kursk. It involves thousands of troops in multiple brigades. But of course, we don't know whether Russia is kind of moving any of its, larger units, better trained units away from Ukraine as yet. And we don't know whether this will have any kind of a significant impact on the battlefield, because one of the crucial things here is that the diversion of Russian troops still seems to not be really easing the pressure on the situation in the east, on the eastern front, in the Donetsk region, where Russian troops are on the offensive and are now reported to be closing in on the strategic town of Pokrovsk.
Right. I was going to ask you about that, but basically you're saying that the diversion hasn't necessarily stopped the combat on the field in Ukraine. That's the case still, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we're getting reports of intensifying battles with, as I said, Russian troops now getting closer to Pokrovsk. This is a really important strategic town. It has been a key target for Moscow for several months. And this is because it is a really important logistics hub for the Ukrainian military. It's also located on an intersection of a road that is also used to supply the troops, but also to kind of evacuate casualties towards Dnipro. So this is certainly something that is worrying the Ukrainians here.
Right. DW Correspondent Sonia Phalnikar in Kyiv, thank you.
I asked military analyst Marina Miron from King's College London what she makes of the claims.
Well, there are two dimensions to it. The first is the informational dimension, and of course it benefits Russia to say Ukraine is using something that was long prohibited to be used on Russian territory, namely NATO weapons, and hoping to diminish possibly the support to Ukraine on the one hand. On the other hand, the Russians are demonstrating this way how NATO is implicated in this war, because the Russians have been claiming all along that they're actually fighting NATO by proxy. So that's the informational dimension. And the military dimension of this, we have no proof of whatever was used in that strike on the bridge on the same river, but what capabilities does Ukraine have militarily? If we look at the past attacks, and I think it was a year ago or so when Ukraine used HIMARS, or actually it was in summer 22, when Ukraine was using HIMARS to attack the Antonovsky Bridge in Kherson. So does Ukraine itself has any better weapons in order to ensure destruction of a bridge and severe Russian logistics, because the Russians were using it for deploying troops and for transporting equipment?
As far as this counteroffensive in Kursk goes, how significant is the Russian transfer or diversion of several thousand troops from occupied Ukraine to its territory?
Well, right now it remains to be seen, because we have conflicting reports in terms of what is happening in Kursk from the Ukrainian side. It seems like the offensive is progressing towards Kornevo. We know that the bridge has been destroyed. So we think that Ukraine will be trying to move to Glushkovka district. The Russians are saying that they are destroying Ukrainian reconnaissance sabotage groups and trying to clear the area. But I think that at this stage, obviously, when the operational tempo of the Ukrainian offensive slows down, the Russians will try to launch a counterattack. And for a counterattack, I assume they will need to deploy more troops.
And on the other hand, what's the situation for Ukrainian troops on the Eastern Front?
The Eastern Front doesn't look as promising as Kursk, because there are reports that citizens are being evacuated from Pokrovsk, which is a logistical hub for the Ukrainian forces. And so it seems like the Russians are concentrating more on Pokrovsk, Toretsk, which are the hottest spots right now for on the Eastern Front. And there are some movements around Vuhledar. The Russians are trying to control the road, Vuhledar-Konstantinivka. So it seems like a trade-off for the Ukrainian forces. They removed some forces from those directions to send them to Kursk. And now the Russians have the possibility to push further there. And it remains to be seen whether Ukraine has made a strategic error, because if Ukraine loses those cities, and Pokrovsk has 60,000, a population of 60,000, so it's pretty significant, the front could start collapsing south of Pokrovsk.
The latest there from Marina Miron from the War Studies Department at King's College London. Thank you.